Pat McAfee had plenty of Guinness in Ireland and Dublin with Nick Saban the night before. But part of me wonders if Florida State might have had some Guinnesses the night before as well. They lose as 10-point favorites, 24-21 on a last-second field goal. In Dublin, they have got a game on Monday night against Boston College. Guys, I was pretty skeptical on Florida State coming into this game. They did not look as good on the lines of scrimmage that we sort of expected. Chris, what did you come away thinking with that ball game and what you saw from the Seminoles in their debut?
Yeah, we're going to talk about Georgia Tech. Fans, don't get upset. We'll get there. We're not short-shifting the team that won. But Florida State's a preseason top 10 team, a team that went undefeated in the regular season last year. That's a big part of the reaction. And when I think about this game and the way it played out, what stuck out to me is what happened in the trenches. Florida State was pushed away both sides of the ball outside of that first drive, essentially. And Georgia Tech's going to come in and run the ball. And Florida State, the defensive line, is supposed to be the strength of that defense. And for the most part, Georgia Tech was getting chunk plays. I think Florida State had just a couple of TFLs, if that. They weren't forced in negative plays. And we'll talk about DJU and everything in a second. But Florida State, the line was supposed to be the strength. They've got new guys everywhere else. But you get pushed around like that in week one, and I got some concerns. Damien, you're the player here. You're the football guy. What did you see out of Florida State?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like you said, the battle of the trenches was a huge eye opener to me. I mean, like you said, that defensive line is supposed to be a strong point of Florida State's defense. And, it kind of looked like from the first drive that Georgia Tech had the ball on offense, they just got kind of pushed around and, they protected their quarterback well. They ran the ball effectively. Like you said, outside of that first drive for Florida State, I mean, they didn't run the ball very effectively. Their run game kind of stalled out. To me, it made Florida State kind of one-dimensional. And, like you said, we're going to get into DJU in a second. But, that's not a favorable matchup for Florida State. So, I was definitely expecting to see more from Florida State's defense. Again, that Georgia Tech's going to run the ball. But, they didn't seem prepared. They didn't seem to be as stout up front as what some of us would have seemed. I mean, I had Florida State as my ACC champions this year. And, somebody to get an automatic bid into the college football playoffs. But, kind of like you said, they're one of those teams that we now have to look at, like, how much do they have to lose? How much did they lose after this game? And, what's going to be next for them?
Well, let's have the DJU conversation now. I promise Georgia Tech fans, we'll get to it. So we saw the accuracy issues at Clemson last year behind a really good offensive line, behind a really good running game with Damian Martinez. He was good at Oregon State, but I was thinking about it, Chris. There wasn't really a moment where I saw him do something in Corvallis, and I thought, wow, like this is the guy that we saw in that sort of brief blink in that Notre Dame game when Trevor Lawrence, I think he had COVID. Was that 21 I'm thinking of?
2020 at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we saw him play that game, and it was like, well, this is clearly the next guy. And we've never seen that out of him since. We saw the arm strength a little bit yesterday. We saw it a couple times at Oregon State, but we saw him be solid.
Did we see the arm strength?
Yeah, I was going to say,
I'm
not familiar with it.
He didn't complete a lot of passes, but it looks very easy for him. So
not that much, yeah.
So we didn't see him really hit any deep balls, but the tools are there, obviously. But I saw more of the Clemson DJU that we saw. That we really didn't see that guy much at Oregon State, and it was really, really concerning. 13 of his 19 completions were 5 yards or less down the field. And granted, a lot of that is definitely play calling, which we won't go too deep in, but I didn't think Mark Norvell had the greatest day of his life. The offensive line, even when he was kind of getting loose and extending plays, we didn't see him make any nice throws on the run. And Georgia Tech is a good team. Florida State's going to play better teams this year than Georgia Tech. And that's, to me, it's disappointing because I thought maybe we had fixed some things. Maybe it was Clemson. But I tell you what I came away from this thinking is if you're Aiden Childs and you're Michigan State, you got to be thinking, boy, we might be feeling pretty good about what we have because what DJU has outside of that Jonathan Smith system, he looked a lot like the Clemson DJU. Damien, what did you see from him?
Something that stuck out to me, and this wasn't as much in the, statistical category or, what he did on the field, but I was kind of trying to study him off the field, his mannerisms, his demeanor. Whenever I think of a quarterback and, DJ, this is his first chance suiting up for FSU. And this is his first opportunity to really go out and show his leadership abilities and, him really taking over the reins of this program. And he just seemed very passive. I mean, from the start of the game, I saw him at times on the sideline whenever he was, doing his little exercises, getting his arm warmed up. Whenever I would play with guys and, the Jalen Hurts, the Tom Brady's, the Tua Tagovailoas, they would be up and down the sidelines talking to the offensive line, talking to the running backs, talking to the receivers. If there's a long drive for the other team on offense and we're stagnant for a while, hey guys, get up, get moving. Whenever we get the ball back, we got to go out there. We got to put points on the board. We got to put a good drive together. And I just didn't really see that. He kind of seemed off to himself. He seemed kind of this blasé mentality. Even after the game, whenever they, were kind of showing him, obviously, his face was all over the cameras because everybody wanted to see what he could do. He just seemed very nonchalant, very, okay, yeah, we just lost a game, but, not kind of having that sense of urgency like we're talking about. Like, you guys have a lot to lose, and you guys may have lost a lot with just losing this one game. So I would have looked to see a little bit more leadership from him, a little bit more determination, a little bit more sense of urgency to win this game.
Yeah, I think from our Austin mock, by the way, Florida State came into that game with a 54% chance of making the playoff. They now have 20% chance. Chris, what did you see from DJU and Illinois?
So we get that first drive, and it's a bunch of short passes, easy stuff. Get your quarterback in a rhythm, and we're thinking, all right, great scripted drive by Mike Norvell to start the game. The problem was that ended up being the entire offense. He had negative air yards per pass in the first half, meaning the average pass he was throwing behind the line of scrimmage. And he had 6 completions longer than 15 yards. 2 of those were on the fourth downs, which were good plays. A lot of that was just yards after catch. And so, if you can't throw down the field with this guy, or you don't trust him to, or you don't think your receivers are getting open downfield, it's going to be a long season for Florida State because you lost Keon Coleman, Wilson, a lot of really talented guys. Jordan Travis could make explosive plays. And if Florida State is back to not being able to get explosive plays, it's going to be a long year. I know it's week 0. I know everybody overreacts to it. I'm not saying they're done, but that was about as bad as a debut you could have had if you're DJU, because it just confirmed all the concerns that everybody had about you coming in and whether or not the Florida State offense could repeat what they did last year with a bunch of new pieces.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk Georgia Tech, because I came away from this thinking, I came into the game thinking they had a shot to win it. I think I said on our ACC show, but if you really watch that team, they were really, really tough and really put together and gave people fits, even though they didn't really have any moments that made people perk up and listen. Now that they might have had that moment that made people perk up and listen and pay attention to this team. And I thought Haynes King, he's had a really up and down career. He had a lot of hype at A&M. The first year he comes in there, they have that kind of ugly win at Colorado. He breaks his foot, and we don't really see much from him. They're kind of scrambling the rest of the year. Comes back, doesn't really play very well. People want Connor Wegman. He never really had any of the promise that he had, or showed any of the real promise that he had at A&M. He had a pretty good year last year. And Haynes wasn't a world beater, but when they needed him, especially on that drive to take the lead late, when they needed him, he answered the bell and made that fourth down throw that he made was one of the better throws that I've ever seen him make in his career, and showed a lot of guts, running the ball, making the defense account for his legs, and keeping Florida State's defensive line at bay. And, we can talk about the line play, and I agree that Florida State's defensive line was pretty disappointing yesterday for a lot of reasons, but part of that is because Haynes King showed off his ability to be a true dual threat, and that, I think, says a lot about his growth as a player and his maturity as a player, and doing what he needed to do yesterday without getting outside of himself and without looking like a guy that was trying to beat the world, just trying to play within the offense. And to me, they jumped off the page to me as a team that I think is going to be I don't know if they're going to be a factor in the ACC title race, but all the teams that are contending for the ACC title, when they play Georgia Tech, they're going to have to show up and at the risk of sounding cliche, buckle the chin strap, because this team wants to hit. And of course, as Brent Key let us know after the game, they want to run the ball.
How much pride did you have watching that group control the line of scrimmage?
Are you kidding me? Run the ball.
Well, you did that extremely well.
Damien, what did you make of the Georgia Tech running game? We saw a little bit from Jamal Haynes. They didn't give him a ton of touches, but 75 yards on 11 carries, 2 touchdowns. Obviously, Haynes King in that mix with a lot of quarterback keepers, zone reads, that kind of stuff. What did you make of what you saw from Haynes King?
Yeah, no, I saw Brent Key's style of football. I spent a little bit of time with Brent Key at Alabama. He was our offensive line coach. So, I got to work with him a little bit. I actually texted him yesterday after the game and just told him that, I enjoyed watching his team play and the way that they worked. And, in the run game, I just really saw them embody his spirit. And, I remember whenever he was at Alabama, he loved guys that played with grit, guys that were tough, guys that were dependable, and guys that just did their job. And that's what I saw a lot of in the run game yesterday for Georgia Tech. Guys were making blocks. O-linemen were getting up to linebackers, whether it was a quarterback, Haynes King becoming a dual threat option, like you said, using his legs, or the running backs getting involved in the ground game. It was just very efficient. Guys were making blocks. The runners were making the right reads. And it was just, like I said, a lot of hard nose, a lot of grit, a lot of toughness in those trenches that we were talking about earlier. And again, it was a disadvantage for Florida State, but that was a huge advantage for Georgia Tech. So kind of like I said, they just really embodied that Brent Key style of football. And, from top to bottom, from the blockers to the runners, everybody did their job.
I came out of this loving Jamal Hayes, and it reminded me something of you said the last time you were on the pod, which was the guys who fall forward, the guys who get the extra yard. His quads looked gigantic, and this guy was just pushing the pile every time. He was I think their leading rusher last year, and he came back, so we know he's a good player. But man, he was physical out there, and Damien as the running back, you had to love that.
I loved it. And like you said, seeing guys fall forward, seeing guys not go down on the first, impact of contact, that's just really what, the guys up front, the guys that are blocking, that's what they want. Whenever they turn on tape, they want to see that they're blocking for a guy who, I want to block for you. But, if there's a one arm in the hole, or if there's a guy unblocked, I want to see what you can do. So, having guys that like yesterday that can fall forward, that can gain an extra 2-3 yards after contact, always falling forward, that physicality, that gets the guys up front going. And then obviously the better that they're doing, the bigger the holes get, the running backs get more and more explosive. Then those 2-3 yards turn into 5-6 yard runs. And eventually, throughout the course of the season, they're going to be banging their head on the goalpost on a lot of big runs because they do the little things right. Like I said, they get a hat on a hat. They eliminate any run through, and running backs are falling forward. They're running through contact. Their quarterback's a dual threat option. I mean, they're really going to have a lot of success running the ball this year.
It's interesting. It's a long, long season now. And I've covered teams in the past where the first time they lose a game, it's basically like you feel like the season's over. In the 12-team playoff era, that's obviously not the case. Florida State, still mathematically very much a factor. If you win the ACC, you are going to be in the playoff period. In theory, they could still have an at-large. But mathematics aside, Chris, I think the biggest thing for me is it wasn't like they did a lot of things wrong or had this sort of fluky game. They got beat up and didn't really do anything that looked elite. And Florida State wasn't in the conversation to be one of the best teams in the country, but certainly one of the best teams in the ACC. And the team, if they play like they did yesterday, that's a 7-8 win team at best. Now, it's week 1. Maybe we'll see some different things out of them. We'll see. They're going to have another big-time spotlight playing in the national window on Monday night on Labor Day against BC. So if you blow out a BC team that, has some as Chris would say, some upside. I'm not sure I'm as sold on them as you are, Chris. But if they blow that team out, then that maybe changes the conversation and you look like you do something at an elite level. But the Florida State team that I saw was not a team that I think is going to be in the playoff even conversation if they play like that. So, Chris, what do you make of this team when you look at their college football playoff odds?
I mean, that was incredibly concerning. And again, week 1, they play another ACC team. If you lose to Boston College and you get upset, you're 0-2 in ACC play.
Goodbye.
You're pretty much done at that point. I mean, it's like there's no division, so you can climb back in technically, but like, talk about the biggest of panic alarms at that point. If you're Florida State here, you're looking at we need to win the ACC and get that automatic bid. But now you're sitting in 17th place in the ACC standings right now. It's really weird. You go to the ESPN standings page, you had Georgia Tech, SMU, everybody else, Florida State down at 17. So, like, there is concern. It's not done. We've had many a week 0, week 1 overreaction. Oh man, this team looks great. Texas is back, folks. They beat Notre Dame. Like, not ready to say that, but a lot of red flags. Some of them we didn't expect, and that is my concern. Like, are you for you? Are they done? Like, no playoff chance anymore?
I mean, we've had some week 0 teams that people overrate and take too much from that. But then we also have USC. And I remember last year, USC plays that week 0 game. We're saying the defense is still a mess. The offensive line can't block. And then you look at them, they are humbled very quickly because of a lot of those same issues. And I think Florida State, when a team shows you who they are, you kind of got to believe them. And Florida State,
and Florida State's been showing us for a long time.
Yeah, they'll
a long time.
We'll see if they can bounce back. But I mean, for a lot of the reasons we've discussed, I was in on Florida State coming into the year a little bit because of the line play, despite all the questions about losing Johnny Wilson, losing Keon Coleman, and having to rely on DJ Uyunglele. But I don't see it.
One thing I think we've seen in a couple years now, it takes a couple of weeks for the teams with the transfers to get things going. And when you've got a transfer quarterback and some other pieces, maybe it takes Florida State a few weeks. That's the positive spin if you're looking for it. Because we've seen it in some of the other games this year as well. If you're relying on transfers, sometimes it takes a few games to get that chemistry. And so I'm not saying all's not lost, because I do think the ACC could be pretty wide open, but there was a lot of pressure on a team we didn't expect. Although, Ubben, you and I, we did pick Georgia Tech plus 10.5, so we did get that pick right.
Florida State did have transfers last year and worked LSU in the opener, so we'll see.